Welcome back, friends. Piera Briganti, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for making time for us. How are you keeping? How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Glad to be here with you guys.
Great. How's the weather over there?
It's really hot. It's pretty hot, but
Too
it's
hot?
summertime, so it has to.
Too hot?
No, 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 not too hot. It's
Okay.
manageable.
Oh, I'm glad to hear. I know Seb complains about the weather very often in the summertime, so I know you guys are going through a similar experience. Um, I just wanted to start by asking you a bit about yourself, yeah, so the listeners can learn. Where did you grow up, and how did you start getting interested in the area of therapy and EMDR?
Okay, well, I'm 41. I'm Italian. I live in Italy now, but I have lived 4 years in Spain, in one of the Canary Islands. And that's actually where my story with the MDR begins. Because a colleague of mine and a friend, we had a bit of a fallout now, but it was a friend before. She contacted me about getting our degrees, our Italian degrees, validated to practice there. And she was doing EMDR. She was an EMDR therapist. I was not at the time, so I got interested because she was talking about this therapy, this approach so enthusiastically. So I was curious, and that's where I got the idea, to get trained. I got trained, and when someone picks up an instrument, plays a few notes, and that's it. You're hooked. That was happened to me with the MDR.
And what was your first experience with EMDR?
Or when you get trained in this approach, you are encouraged to start using it right away with your former patients, the patients you are already seeing as a therapist. Maybe not the most complex ones. An easy case, quote, there's not such thing as an easy case, but there are simple cases. And you test right away what you learn in training. So you ask yourself, wow, is this really possible? Is this really happening? And it is, it happens, really.
And Piera, what for people who aren't aware of what EMDR means, before we get started on the conversation, can you just explain what that therapy is, what it stands for? Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, EMDR is an acronym. It stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And it is a therapy approach, an evidence-based one. So it's pretty well researched. It actually was born in research. There's a nice anecdote about how EMDR was discovered by an American psychologist who sadly passed away in 2019, Francine Shapiro. She was the mind, behind EMDR. And it's basically a therapy approach which uses neurobiology, the neurobiology of the human brain to resolve every kind of issues, in particular, traumatic experiences, traumatic issues. You want to know more? I bet you do.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So for someone who's listening to this, right? Because I came across it because a family member had a traumatic experience like you're saying, and we were looking for therapies, and we came across EMDR. So when we find out what the acronym is, like, well, how the hell does eye movement have anything to do with therapy and anything to do with healing trauma and all that type of stuff? So could you just kind of like delve into that? Like, how are those two things connected?
Well, it's nothing new. It was already there, but people didn't know. Eye movement stimulates an innate process of the human brain, which is called memory reconsolidation. It is what happens when we sleep at night. We take the experiences that we have just lived or the past one, and we clean those experiences about the irrelevant information, and we just take the good, to say, to make it simple, And that happens even with adversities, with traumatic experiences. So not every trauma get a person traumatized. We are able to spontaneously process a trauma. Sometimes we are not in the condition, or the trauma is too much, too intense, too prolonged, or we are too little when it happens. So the brain struggles with, carry on this innate spontaneous process. And those memories, those experiences get stuck in the brain, in a particular set of areas of the brain where, all the emotional processing happens, which is, not to bore your listeners, but, just to understand, the limbic system.
And so, Piera, I love examples. So, for instance, like in my head, I'm just thinking, hypothetically, someone had quite a traumatic childhood, and but they're an adult now, and they live and function in society kind of as expected. They have a job, maybe they have a boyfriend, girlfriend, but still this trauma kind of resurfaces in their life, in their personal life. Is it, for instance, do you sit down with them and then talk to them about the particular trauma as they move their eyes?
No, it's not that simple. You first help the person to understand the connection between present and past, what triggers their traumatic experiences in daily life. It can be, if you talk about someone that has had a difficult or traumatic childhood, it's probably relationships that trigger the trauma. Okay. So what happens is usually someone who struggles with jealousy, with abandonment, with confidence, with trust, for instance. So you help them connect, you're feeling this, you're experiencing this, you have this symptoms because you lived those experiences maybe decades ago. Okay, that's pretty easy to connect, and they're already helped by this, because they make sense of their experiences. They're not just people attacked by their own symptoms. They have a meaning for them. And then you guide them through EMDR processing, actually, which, an average session looks quite different than a talk therapy session. It is something that they have never done, even though they have experienced other treatments, other kinds of therapy before.
And you mentioned it looks quite different. So is it still I sit in a chair and you sit in a chair and you're kind of, are you guiding me through the eye movement, or how is it specifically different?
Specifically different is, you don't just talk about the trauma. You ask specific questions to activate, to reactivate the memory that you are working on that day, okay? And then you guide the patient through several sets of bilateral stimulation. Those can happen in office, of course, but also online. I work online a lot. So you ask them to move their eyes back and forth through the screen, following your fingers as you do in office, for example, or you can use a light bar, which is this thing that I have back here. That's a light bar. So the light moves back and forth. You can choose the color, or you can ask the patient to tap themselves like this, or use this, for example. These are tappers that stimulates, that provide bilateral stimulation, which is eye movement or tactile bilateral stimulation, okay? And you see the change happening. about the memory you're working on. So those few questions that you asked before starting the processing phase are like baseline evaluation of how much the memory still disturbs, what are the emotions associated with it or triggered by it, the physical sensation. The body is a really important component of EMDR processing. And of course, the self-cognition. So what do you think of yourself when you remember that experience? And usually people start with, I'm unworthy, I'm impotent, I'm unsafe, I'm unlovable. So really heavy things to think about yourself. And through these sets of bilateral stimulation, you see spontaneously these elements changing, moving. So the bodily sensation change, the cognition changes, the emotional component changes, and of course the SUD, which is, the level of disturbance that you measure at the beginning on a scale 0 to 10. How much is this memory disturbing for you now? And you start always with a 10, a 9, an 8, whatever. Everything that is different than 0, which is, neutral, it doesn't affect me anymore. And you see that number changing, lowering till, you get to 0. The patient gets to say, oh, now it's a 0. I remember it. I remember it was tough, but it doesn't affect me anymore. And what do you think about yourself now that it doesn't disturb you? Well, that I am worthy, that I deserve love. And that happens, spontaneously. You don't have to prompt or push the person to do that. The brain does it on its own because it is an innate process. You're just stimulating it in a state of awake instead of, during nighttime.
And Piera, just to kind of like draw some sort of delineation between what we would experience, well, what most people would think of as like traditional therapy. You sit on a chaise longue, you talk through your problems with a therapist, and eventually, the goal for all therapy is to kind of get to that point you're saying, to get to 0, right? Where you can say, right, well, we've talked it through, we've given you coping mechanisms, whatever it may be, and now this memory, I remember it, like you said, it's very tough, but it no longer affects my day-to-day life. I can now move on with the therapy. That would be like how most people would kind of imagine, or what we've seen on the television screens or whatever, as normal therapy. So what I want to understand is how, for example, you mentioned some physical cues that you do in the therapy, like following the light bar or tapping yourself. Now, obviously, these are techniques that obviously wouldn't be involved in that traditional image of therapy that I just gave before. How do those physical techniques change or help the patient? That's where I get a bit lost. So how does, for example, if I'm following your finger across the screen, or I'm following the light bar, how does that help me in my healing process? We can get into the science of it if you want.
A little bit, maybe not with technicalities because it will be boring for your listeners. But the greatest difference between a traditional approach, the couch laying setting that you mentioned before, and EMDR is you cannot do what you do with EMDR. With a traditional approach, you cannot get the same results. You cannot achieve those results because with the talk therapy, you're just working with your cortex, basically. You're trying to see a different perspective, to think different about what happened to you, to give an explanation to what happened to you. But you're not helping the brain to really move. Remember when I said that the traumatic experiences get stuck in the limbic system, in a set of areas of the brain? You cannot unstuck those memories by just talking about them, okay? You will mostly get the person re-traumatized sometimes, if the trauma is pretty heavy, and to re-experience it, or do not so much about it. But when you use bilateral stimulation, you actually move those memories from the limbic system in the brain, and the long-term area of the brain where cognition lives, when you can reflect about the same experience differently without the emotional and physical activation that you previously initially experienced during the trauma. So that's completely different. And this has been observed in vivo. They did sessions of the EMDR while recording what was happening in the patient's brain. So they saw what happened. They know how it works. And it works this way. The activation at the beginning of the session when the SUD is 10, 9, disturbs a lot, okay, is the limbic system is all lightened up. It's all illuminated. And then this activation starts to move through the brain and ends up, in temporal associative areas of the brain. That's where long-term memory is, and cognition. So that's what the science behind it. Pretty solid.
And sorry, I'm just really curious, how I forget the name. I'm so terrible with names. Like, you literally said it about 10 minutes ago. But how did the researcher who just unfortunately died in 2019? How did they find? Like, how did they come across this? Because it seems kind of. I mean, it makes a lot of sense now that you're saying it. But I imagine when they first came across the idea, it was hugely innovative. How
they didn't know,
or how did they do that?
Yes. It all started with a walk in the park by Francine Shapiro, the developer of EMDR. She was this is something about the Newton's apple, it's pretty fun. She was taking this walk in the park. She was a cancer survivor, so she was thinking about heavy episodes, heavy circumstances of her life. And she was following the light sun through, the branches of the trees, the leaves. And she was moving her eyes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And she finally noticed that her thoughts about those experiences and her emotions about them were different. So she got curious and she started testing it, quote, with her friends. So asking their friends to do the same. Well, think about something pretty intense in your history, in your life, and do this, move your eyes. And by this informal testing, she discovered, the great power of eye movements, and she had the will to put this in a real research setting. So the walk in the park anecdote is placed in 1987. The first study on the EMDR is of 1989. So right away, EMDR. That was called EMD at the time, started with research. And, how they got today to understand and to really know how it works, it took, decades of research, but, still ongoing, still researching on how to treat one condition or another,
Piera, sorry, Jim, just one last question from me. So once, one of the problems that we have with therapy is that obviously we're always talking about previous experience, right? Whichever therapy it is that people choose to elicit. So we're always talking about previous experiences and how they obviously then, affect our day-to-day lives. But obviously, and I know the argument would be that you're given mechanisms to then help you through your day-to-day life and maybe deal with potential problems in the future better than you had done before starting on the course. So I wonder if a patient comes to you
Yes.
and they're trying to, they've got a traumatic episode that happened during their childhood and it's been affecting them for the last 20 or 30 years, even if they may not realize it exactly the link, but they know something's wrong. They come
Yes.
to you, you help draw that link between a childhood event, for example, and to why all their romantic relationships break down, for example. So
Yes.
they've learned these physical techniques. Well, could they then use those physical techniques if they had a traumatic experience, let's say 5 years after finishing with you? Could they use those same techniques themselves, like have an agency over it and be like, my dog just died. that I can see it, this is going to like be quite traumatic for me, and then try to use those techniques again? Or would they have to kind of sit down with a professional and do it all over again? Or once they know the techniques, is it something that you can actually muster up yourself and use to help protect you against future traumatic events that come in your life that we're all going to experience?
Well, if it was a well done job, you have worked with, a three-pronged approach. So past, present triggers, and future templates. So when are you going to face the same experience or similar ones in the future? How will you act? How will you feel? So you use the same similar protocol you use with the past, even with the future. So when you ended up your therapy and you are graduated, finally, you are well equipped to face whatever is coming, whatever future is reserving to you. But of course, you teach the patient to use bilateral stimulation, maybe not the very same way as we do in session, working on a trauma, on their own. So if you get too activated, if you have a stressful period in your life because of work, because of something happened, you can use bilateral, mostly tapping, because it's easier, it's more comfortable. You can do this sitting on your desk at work, or you can buy a set of tappers and put them inside your pockets, and whenever you need them, you activate them. You activate bilateral tapping, and you help your nervous system to calm down. Because another thing we know is that bilateral stimulation, especially slower bilateral stimulation, helps the nervous system to calm down. It's like a safe signal. So whenever you get overstressed or overwhelmed by something, that's not supposed to be every time a trauma or a traumatic experience. You can deal with that. Help your brain to manage the situation or to manage your emotional activation better. Okay, so you use the tapping on your own.
Piera,
did I answer your question? Okay.
I saw videos online, I think on YouTube, of kind of EMDR tutorials maybe. And kind of to follow up from Seb's question, would say somebody hasn't had EMDR therapy with a therapist, but they're interested, and you said that the bilateral movement helps to calm down the nervous system, would you recommend that somebody tries just moving their eyes left and right, and watching a video
on their own?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't recommend that, because this is another important thing I wanted to talk to you about, especially because you mentioned in your email when you contacted me, compassion. EMDR is not just a technique to work on memories. It's psychotherapy. So you just don't heal the traumatic episode specific of a person's life. There are emotional, relational wounds, attachment trauma to heal. And that heals not just by using bilateral stimulation, but you, the therapist, being a tool for it, being a relational tool. So you use your compassion, your ability to connect. You become, and that's really, really important, a compassionate witness of their traumatic experiences. They haven't talked about them, or if they did, they weren't listened to, they weren't believed, okay, most of the time. So you gotta heal that too, not just what happened, but how it happened, who was the aggressor, who believed you, who mistreated you, who abused you. Most of the time is, a family member, a parent, is your mom, is your dad. That's, as human beings, attachment is the fundamental of our personality. So that's not something that you just heal by moving your eyes back and forth, thinking about a memory. That can also be re-traumatizing, if you don't have the right competence and the right skills to do that. And of course, there are more complex situations I've listened to one of your episodes, the one of Lee Teresa Moore, that talked about dissociation. Great one, really, really intense. When you face a situation like that, you cannot just dive into, okay, let's go into trauma processing and think about the trauma. Most of the time, the person doesn't have a recollection of the trauma. So that's a first difficulty. And the person usually doesn't have emotional regulation ability to face even the processing phase of therapy. So you gotta use an advanced modality to use bilateral stimulation with those types of patients. When the structural dissociation, you cannot just ask the person to tell their story, to tell their worst memories and work on them. That's too much. You gotta, bring the personality, the structure of the personality as a teamwork, because there are usually cases in which the personality is fragmented in parts. When Teresa was saying in one of the pages, she was saying, and I regressed to a little child. That's a part of the personality. Okay, so you gotta work with that part before getting into what happened to that little girl 30 years ago. So you cannot do this on your own. And I wouldn't recommend that. It's really dangerous. But I'm aware that there are websites or YouTube videos that, provide bilateral simulation and explain how to do EMDR on your own. That's not the correct choice for someone who has had a childhood trauma history. That's not recommendable at all.
Piera, I know this is almost the impossible question. I know I'm basically asking you how long is a piece of string, but I think a lot of people who, I think personally, therapy, if we could make an ideal world, I think the government should have a universal credit and they pay everyone a course so that everyone can do therapy no matter what they've gone through in life or haven't gone through. That's just me. But given that that's not the world that we live in, right? A lot of people, they recognize the fact that they need therapy of some sort, right? They recognize, look, I know that what I'm dealing with isn't healthy, but the problem that they have is that obviously therapy costs money, and they probably think it's not therapy isn't a thing of I'll do 2 sessions and then I'll sort myself out and then I'm good to go for the rest of my life. So my question is, and I know this is an impossible question, but if you can just give a rough idea to someone who's maybe listening and maybe interested, but they're worried about, I can't get started because I just won't have the money to do this. How long roughly? And I know for every patient it will be different, but on a very rough scale, how long can someone expect to go through a course with you and, as you say, graduate, so to speak? What are we talking? 6 months? Are we talking 3 years? What's the rough kind of plan that we're looking at?
It depends. It depends on the type of traumatization they have experienced. So I can roughly put it like this. If someone has had a loving and caring family, no childhood trauma, and they get into a car crash or an earthquake or, a catastrophe, something big but punctual, they just, the first introductory session to talk about what happened to them. The next is going to be maybe a emotional regulation strategy to teach them and to explain how the process works. And maybe 1 or 2 at the most, EMDR processing session. That's all. With this simple PTSD, classic PTSD case, okay? It's different when there's a story, when the patients were traumatized in their attachment relationship, so in their childhood. We don't know at the beginning how fast the person is going to process every single traumatic experience that you pick up and map that needs to be worked on, to be processed, okay? We know that they will, but, sometimes the person works on 2, even 3 memories in a session in an hour, and another takes, to get through and to overcome the unique experience, 2 to 3 sessions. Okay, so that changed, of course, the timeline. And another option, another possibility is the one that I cited, that I mentioned before, when there's structural dissociation. That's going to be a longer process, even with the EMDR, because there are barriers to the trauma. Okay, so you need to work before on the barriers, before on building teamwork with the parts, and before to get the patient to remember what happened to them in many cases. And then you can, tip of a finger, so layer by layer, going down and work on the story, on the actual facts. Okay, so that might take 2 years, 3 years, not more, basically. So it's not I've been in therapy for 18 years. That's, that doesn't exist with the EMDR. That's, it means something is not really working if you are in therapy, if you have been in therapy for the last 18 years or 20, I've heard stories like that.
Perfect. That's really, really helpful. And you mentioned at the start that you, for example, you yourself have patients where you do it online. So I wonder, do you see? Because again, I think another thing that people think of is like, oh, I need to be in person, and it's like depending on where you live, that may be easier or not. If you live in a massive city, then maybe you have those. But if you live somewhere in the back, in the countryside or whatever, and there's no local EMDR therapist, you might feel like, oh, well, that's it. I can't. I only have to do it in person. So, how for you does it work? The exact same in terms of the success rates, the way that the patient feels. Do you notice any difference between someone who can come and sit with you in person and someone who's following your finger and talking through their problems like we are now over the internet?
I do not. No, I do not notice any differences. Of course, you have to put yourself out there, and make the effort to make the person feel that you are there. You're not just in front of a screen, having a chat. You are really connected with them. With what was I saying about compassion, before? That still that place, even in an online, in a Zoom call or on a Skype call or whatever, and even if the person is, I'm seeing patients from many countries, many continents, even, someone is in Thailand, someone in Canada, someone in UK, or someone in Spain, a great distance between you and the patient. So you gotta fill that distance with your personal involvement, in what you're doing. But the effectiveness is the same. It's neuroscience. You are working with the other person's brain, so it doesn't matter if you're doing that in an office and asking the person to move their eyes or to tap their shoulders while they are sitting in front of you in the same room, or if you're asking to do the same thing 1,000 kilometer distance. It works the same.
Thanks for that, Piera. I want to move just a little bit in a few minutes to talk about with what kind of conditions or what challenges or difficulties that someone have can EMDR help with. But just one more question that I wanted to ask was that you mentioned how sometimes with talk therapy, someone can almost get re-traumatized because they have to bring up what happened to them again and again, maybe, and it's just a horrible ordeal. With EMDR, how do you kind of help that person feel okay with bringing up that really difficult or series of difficult experiences?
Well, that's where compassion takes has its importance. You are there with them. You say to them that that's the past, that's already ended, that was not fair, that they didn't deserve what happened. There are little interventions that you do, especially when the trauma is pretty heavy and the person is really activated by thinking about it and remembering it. You gotta be there, you gotta make them feel safe with you, talking about the horrible things that happened to them.
Have you come across, I think I have, people who have had some traumatic experiences or difficult experiences in the past and just don't want to revisit it. Is an essential part of EMDR that you have to be willing to look into the past?
Yes, of course, because all symptoms, all psychopathology, all issue is connected to what happened to you in the first place, where you learned, from those traumatic experiences, you have learned who you are, what you can expect in relationships, for example, the fact that you deserve or don't deserve love and respect. So that's pretty important in life, walking in life. So it's important that they go, that they access the trauma. But of course, if there's a defense, of course, that's for protection. I don't want to think about it. I don't care even sometimes, that's in the past. I don't care, but they are affected by the trauma as at the same time. You work with the defense with the same bilateral stimulation that you use for process a trauma. So, for example, how much you feel you don't want to think about that. 10, top. I don't want to. Okay. And where do you feel the desire, the wish not to talk about it ever? Or in my stomach, it's something in my stomach. Okay. And you process the defense with the same stimulation. And that number, that defense is gonna lower, it's gonna fade. Okay. The person gains courage and gains the motivation to go through the trauma. Okay. I feel not like I can do that now. I have strength now to do that. Those, of course, are, it's not just the basics of the EMDR. This is why we are always constantly training ourselves, because there are no such thing as simple cases. What do you do if you work with memories, because you are an EMDR therapist and the person says that they don't remember anything about their childhood, or they don't want to. Okay, what do you do? That's why you get an advanced training to overcome those difficulties in your clinical work.
Okay.
That's why it's so important not to do that on your own.
Yeah.
I mean, that defense that I don't want to think about it, or I don't recall, it's there for a reason, to protect you from something that you cannot manage on your own. So you shouldn't be doing that on your own, alone.
That's fantastic. It's important. I'm so glad we're talking about this, because it makes sense, right? Why are you potentially bringing down your defense barriers when you're on your own and you have no supportive environment? It's very dangerous, right? Yeah.
Yes, of course. You don't know how trauma works, how trauma affects the brain. The therapist, the trauma-informed therapist, can give you that information, can, explain why you feel guilty about something that you shouldn't be feeling guilty about. Because that's a traumatic effect. That's the response of the brain to the trauma, okay? If you don't know that, you just, get flooded by the guilt.
You're right.
What are you going to do then?
Piera, only a few more questions. One is, and I think you've already answered it, but on your website, there's a long list of conditions that you state that EMDR can assist with. So obviously we talked a lot about trauma and maybe personal difficulties and kind of reoccurring thoughts of I'm not good enough, and but you also talk about depression, and you also talk about anxiety, and there's a long list of other conditions. Is there a way for you to kind of concisely talk about, or is it just the fact that you said before that all of the things that we are struggling with now are as a result of what's happened to us and our experiences in the past, and we must kind of reprocess? Is that more or less it? Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Well, the definition of trauma has changed over time with research, of course, in neuroscience. So we now know that trauma is not just the big event, the catastrophe, the earthquake, the violent attack, okay, the car crash. It's not just that. Trauma is many, many things. So it can go from, having a detached or cold parent, not so connected with your emotional needs, which is a trauma too. Maybe not the most severe one, but it's a trauma. It affects the way you see yourself. It shapes your personality, okay? And that can result in a really common issue, such as low self-esteem, okay? But that's a trauma issue too. So you work through the trauma, through the childhood adversity that in this case would be growing up with a detached and not so connected, not so tuned parent. Okay. And it can go to, it can reach levels of course, a more complex story where you are physically neglected, or you are sexually abused, physically abused. It's a continuum. Trauma is a continuum. So it starts with minor experiences, childhood adversities, and it gets to the top where, experiences that everyone would easily recognize and, call a trauma. So you treat everything that is in the mental health field a concern, an issue: low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, looking for the connection between the symptom, a present issue, and the story of the person. And you work through those experiences with the EMDR, and you see the present changing, working at the beginning with the past, then the present triggers, and the future, as I said before. It's pretty surprising and impressive, even for us, for the therapists. Yeah. We are all amazed by what we do. You cannot believe that you can achieve such results just doing, this type of, just using this approach. But it is true, luckily, because, there are people out there suffering. There's an immense load of trauma. Think about now, the war. Mm-hmm. And the economic crisis we're facing, COVID pandemic, of course, but trauma is, everywhere, all over the place, in every family. There is something that goes not optimally or not good,
Yeah, it is fantastic. I really appreciate this. I think we're really achieving a kind of destigmatization, or if there is a stigmatization of something that they haven't heard of before. I think you've done such a good job of letting people feel safe and curious about EMDR. One thing I kind of want to ask is, from your point of view, you're saying it's so effective. I'm so lucky that I get to help people with this process. I'm amazed at how effective it is. Why do you think it isn't so widespread, so prevalent in the world? I mean, obviously it is touching millions of lives, but why do you think everybody doesn't know about EMDR?
Well, it is getting more common and common, more known and known every day, as we speak, because one of the great things of this hyper-connected world, many influencers, for example, talk about their experience with the EMDR. I'm sorry, I gotta connect my charger. Yes. So people get to know EMDR even by these people, these stars talking about their experience with it, with EMDR. But of course, there are also critical opinion about it, because it is a danger for other approaches, other less effective, less science-based approach. So it's kind of threatening, so to speak. This is probably one of the components, one of the reasons why everybody doesn't know about EMDR. But it's getting better because, our president of the EMDR Association, which is, at the same time the president of the Italian Association and the European Association, goes on TV, gets award, and she talks and talks and talks about EMDR. For example, in Italy and in Europe too, in other countries too. And there are more and more official entities, official associations that train the therapists to the method all over the world. So it's not just EMDR Europe, EMDR Italy, there's Spain, which I'm also part of because I lived there, so I get certified there too. There's an EMDR in United States. There's an EMDR Asia. There's an EMDR China. So it's spreading.
Thanks for that, Piera. Seb, do you have any questions before we come to you?
No, I don't have any other questions. I should like to take the moment just to say, I think it's like Jim said, it's been great because I think it really will. You've answered some really simple questions, some of the simple doubts that people may have that may just be a blocking to even reaching out to their local EMDR therapist. And I think I hope anyway that this conversation creates that level of interest and makes people think maybe this is the route for me that I hadn't heard of or thought of before, or I dismissed because it wasn't so widely accepted in the general public, at least, even if it is in the scientific spheres. So for me, no more questions, but thank you so much, Piera. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I also...
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys.
I will will leave your website link in the show description. So am I right in saying if someone is interested, they can also contact you for online sessions? Yeah.
Of course, yes. As I said, I see patients all over the world, so I'm glad to help if I can.
And in English, Spanish, and Italiano. Perfect.
Exactly, and trilingual, is a trilingual therapist. Yes.
All right. The last question we have, Piera, is just how do you take care of your own mental health?
Well, this is another fantastic thing about EMDR. By working with this therapy, you really witness the change. Every session that you work with a patient on a traumatic issue or on a really intense, really heavy memory, for example. So you touch with hands that you're helping them, that you're unburdening them about their story. So that doesn't really charge you, that doesn't really affect you the way it probably would if you were just talking about their stories and do nothing or not so much for them, and if you weren't seeing their lives changing session after session. So it's easier, of course, to take care of our own mental health. Sometimes, of course, we do supervision if a case is pretty heavy or pretty difficult, or it touches a little bit of our own stories. But I just walk with my dogs. I care for my diet. I rest, of course. I go out in the nature. That's what I usually do. Sometimes, when I get overwhelmed or overstressed, I tap. I do this, and it's okay.
Fantastic. Oh, well, We haven't heard that one yet, Pierre. We've had 95 guests and we haven't heard the top yet. So lovely. Yeah, I just want to thank you again for your time. I will.
You should try
I
it.
will. Thank you. I just want to thank you for your time, and I really, yeah, like Seb said, I really hope that this helps people kind of feel like they are more familiar with the therapy and more confident with potentially trying it out. And yeah, thank you for your work. It's great that you get to help so many people who are going through so many difficult challenges.
I hope that too. Thank you to give me the time and space to talk about what I do and to talk about what EMDR can do. I hope this really helps curiosity over it, and pushes someone to seek for help if they're struggling with something that happened to them.
Thank you. Yes.